My father left behind a strange confession. I don't know what to do now. Hello, nosleep. This is the first time I'm writing in this sub, but I need your advice since you folks seem to have experience in such weird matters. Well, here goes. Chapter first state that I'm from Korea, but my name is irrelevant in this story, and in any case, I don't want anyone recognizing or gossiping about me and my father. My father was a financial investor, but due to some bad luck during the Asian financial crisis, he lost nearly all his money when I was young, not to mention being fired from the investment firm he worked for. He and my family moved into a room in my grandmother's old house in the country for a few years as a result. However, he managed to secure a job at a small accountant firm in Seoul 4 or 5 years later, leaving my grandmother's house. As far as I know, he never stepped foot in that house again for these last 23 years. Now, don't get me wrong, this was not due to any tensions between him and my grandmother. In fact, he encouraged her to live with us in her last years, but to a strange aversion to his old hometown itself. This was the only point he wouldn't let himself be persuaded by my mother and grandmother. He wouldn't go back under any reason. I think he would have tried to sell my grandmother's old house if she didn't protest so strongly against it. By now, you're probably wondering, why am I telling you all this, so let me get to the point. 3 months ago, I got a call from my mother that my father had disappeared. He had apparently called sick at work and was last seen boarding a train that was headed to his old village. But it was only last week that I received a call from his solicitor telling me that my father had given to him an envelope a few months ago to be opened on his death or unexplained absence for 3 months. In the envelope, I found his will and a letter addressed to me. I will write it down here word for word. My dear son, if you are reading this, it will probably mean that I am no longer in this world. If you receive this envelope upon my death, and if the causes seem to you quite natural, for example, dying from old age, or of a common illness, or from a car accident, that is, a death that may happen to anyone else, please throw this letter away without reading the contents below, if only for the good times we had together. However, if I have disappeared with no clue as to my whereabouts, or if my death seems, continue reading on. You may remember we lived in your late grandmother's house during your youth, when I was nearing bankrupt. During the few years we lived there, I was often visited by old friends of mine. Most offered to console me in my time of trouble, but there were a few who weren't so considerate. One of them was Kim Retracted. You may remember him, as he often gave you large amounts of pocket money while telling you to call him uncle. The real reason he was so generous to you was to spite me, since he was often jealous I managed to go to college and get a good job while he was stuck on his parents' farm. He often hinted, gloatingly, that I ended up being more miserable than he had, and that his kids would never see their father broke, living in a borrowed room in their grandmother's house. However, it was one night that I finally saw red. Kim was rather drunk that night, and he told me, mockingly, that you would be better off having him as a father than a loser like I was, actually telling me that he was considering adopting you to unburden a poor friend. I literally kicked him out of the house, but I was determined he would pay for that taunt. Now, I knew one thing about Kim. He was extremely partial to good wine. I therefore, after the necessary preparations, invited him for dinner a few days later, saying I wanted to apologize for the way I was rough with him the other night, and to make up for it, to give him a present of an old bottle of raspberry wine, his favorite. You may remember that your grandmother's old house had an underground cellar I dug myself. I told him the wine was in there, and we went down together. Once in the cellar, I gave him a bottle, telling him to examine the wine, and while he was absorbed, knocked him out with a blow to the head, using a spade. I was determined no one would find out where he was, so, binding his body up with ropes, I carried him over to a corner and proceeded to wall him up using bricks. I was sure this wouldn't be noticed, as the cellar wall was also in bricks and was rather irregular. But as I was nearly finished, Kim regained consciousness. Astonished, he managed to groggily ask, "Lee, what are you doing?" I laughed at him, telling him that since he thought I deserved no children since I was a poor loser, I thought his children deserved no father in reverse, and that no one would know what became of him. This was quite true, as the village was a small country town with no CCTV, and that, drunk as he usually was, everyone would assume he took a wrong step and fell in the river. I finished up the wall and left, his muffled cries ringing in my ears. As you know, my son, more than 20 years have passed since then. But recently, I've been starting to hear things. I hear Kim's voice, pleading with me to free him, or threatening that I would pay for what I did. It was enough to keep me from my sleep. But the other night, I saw Kim at the foot of my bed, laughing at me, telling me it was my turn now. I thought it was a dream, but I found a mound of dirt, the same dirt from the cellar floor in the morning. Please, my dear son, if I have disappeared or died mysteriously, bury the entrance to that cellar and tear down the old house to the ground in my place. When I finished reading this, I naturally thought my father had gone mad and would have ignored the letter. But, on the advice of my father's solicitor, I decided it would be safe to recover the body of my father's friend, if there was one, and to give it a proper burial, then tear down the house, as my father asked me to. So, 2 weeks earlier, I went down to my grandmother's old house and hired a team of workers to remove the bricks from the wall of the cellar. But, and this is why I'm writing this here, I and the workers saw something utterly inexplicable. We did indeed find a body walled up, tied up with old ropes, as my father said, and curiously well preserved, as if it had died yesterday. However, the body was not that of a stranger. It was that of my father, not as I saw him last, but just as I remembered him in my youth when he was 40, exactly when he had walled up his friend. In case you're wondering, yes, the walls were untouched when we arrived for at least 20 years. And yes, the body was that of my disappeared father, just younger. What did I do with that discovery, you wonder? Nothing, actually. I just removed the body and asked the workers to seal up the cellar entrance with cement and tear down the house, paying them well to keep all this a secret. And I would have let this pass as a weird incident, but since I uncovered the body in that old cellar wall, I've been having strange dreams as well. I see my father mostly, begging me to help him get out. I hear his voice after dark, when I'm alone in my house, praying me to help him. But I also have other dreams as well. I sometimes see a stranger laughing at me. He mocks me, saying I shouldn't have torn down that wall. And when I see him in my dreams, I wake up to find a mound of dirt beside my bed. I don't know what to do now. Should I go back to where that house was,